welcome back to our Marketing Basics video series. So now we're talking about strategy, and this is part 2. We'll talk about how to translate objectives into a promotional strategy statement. If you got any questions about what I'm talking about, my information's there on the right side of the screen. I'd love to hear from you. Let's get started. So a quick recap of what we covered in the last video. Remember the difference between objectives and strategy. So the objectives are what you need to achieve. Remember, that's your selfish to-do list. The strategy is what consumers want or what they need. And you're thinking about how do we align those two things. A strategy is also a framework to hold it all together. So if you care about integrated marketing campaigns and having a consistent idea of what you're doing with your marketing, the strategy is the glue that holds that all together. A strategy is also really important because it's going to manage your expectations and create alignment for all of the marketing folks that are working on this campaign. And finally, a promotional marketing strategy is different from other types of business strategy. This is because it's all about marketing communications. This is about storytelling. It's about flipping the objectives that are, remember, self-serving for the business into something that's actually meaningful for your target audience. All good things to keep in mind as we get started. Now let's go ahead and actually create some statements of your own. So how do you do that? Well, a good statement should be just one sentence long. You can have up to 2 sentences, but that's the maximum. It needs to be brief, to the point. You need a clear framework. We're going to expand on it later, but for right now, just creating the strategy statement, keep it simple. Keep it one sentence. You're going to take all those company-centric promotional objectives and you're going to turn them into more consumer-facing language. So the first thing is we're talking about just the promotional objectives, generally not the sales objective, because the sales objective, if I'm going to increase revenue, I'm going to increase market share, there's very little that you can do to make that compelling for consumers. But the promotional objectives, those purchase funnel ones and the brand attribute ones, those we can find ways to make compelling for consumers. So that's the first thing we're going to do is we're going to think about how do we change them and change the language of this so it's something that matters to them. We need to speak directly to the consumer as if using you in the statement, or you or we or our and us, anything that makes it feel like, hey, we're talking to them rather than talking about ourselves as a company. And that's the key thing about this last one. It's not just about inserting a you in the statement, it's making sure that as you're assembling the statement, you really are talking about their needs and what they're going to do and why this is of value to them, and just happen to mention your client rather than starting off talking about them but then start talking about how amazing your company is. And I see that happen in a lot of student submissions is people are so busy selling, they're so used to coming up with ideas that they end up being too pushy, and they're talking about the company, not talking about the benefit for the consumer. So to do this, we're going to take all the keywords that we came up with in our promotional objectives, put them on a sheet of paper, and then we're going to find a way to include each of them in that strategy statement, in that one sentence. Now, if that's too hard, I can't fit them all in one sentence, it's possible I may have just put too much stuff in my objectives and I need to reel it back a bit. It's quite possible that some of that stuff is not critical and it can be spared. If that's the case, I'll need to go back and modify my objectives and take out the terms, because you don't want to put it in the objectives and then not address it in the strategy. I want you to also be thinking about choosing a strong verb. The reason we're doing this is I want you to be thinking about what is the action you're hoping consumers will take. A lot of people will say, oh, that's a call to action. But a call to action is something we specifically want to happen in a tactic. Remember, we're not into tactics yet. This is just high level. So we're strategically thinking as a consumer is exposed to this campaign, what do we hope they will do? And the language, the ideas that you used in the promotional objectives should really guide what that verb is going to be. There really should be an emphasis on storytelling, because remember, this is all marketing communications. And if we're going to have a successful strategy statement that's inspiring, we really want to make sure that this resonates with the consumer. And a way to kind of often make that relevant and make it interesting is by making sure there is some kind of storytelling components. It sounds compelling. It sounds interesting. I want to go take that action. I think sometimes too often all I see is just the words reassembled, but there's no passion behind it. There's nothing that excites me to move forward as a consumer and respond to that strategy. And this last one is another one. I think it's you've taken some marketing classes, you've written some creative copy, but doing the strategy statement, it's not a slogan, and you're not doing a creative tagline. What you're doing here is you're creating a statement that's going to be used just for your internal audiences, just to get centered on, like, hey, here's what we're trying to do with this campaign. You're just creating a framework. So don't get too clever and start trying to write the slogan. What you're just trying to do here is make sure you have distilled all of that objectives and made it relevant to the consumer, because then everything you do moving forward, you're going to remember you're doing it in service of your consumer audience. So let's look at a specific example of how do you do this, because I think that will help make more sense to a lot of people. So in the objective videos that we did earlier, we talked about sales objective, we talked about purchase funnel objectives, we talked about brand attribute objectives. I chose one of each, and we're going to use that as an example. And now I'm going to switch on over to Word and show you, I've put those objectives in my Word document. So what would I do here? Well, the first thing I would look at and say, okay, well, this first objective up here, that's a sales objective. There's no way I can really make the consumers interested in that, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. This next one, what are some key words that I need to think about? Well, okay, I want to drive awareness. So awareness is probably my first keyword. Knowing who the brand is, Patty's Pizza, that's probably important to know. It's a family-friendly Italian food restaurant. Well, if I put that in there, it's family-friendly, it's Italian food. Oh, it's located in Seattle. I think we can safely assume it's a restaurant if they serve Italian food. Oh, and increase the perception that Patty's Pizza is inexpensive. Voila. I have highlighted the key words from all my promotional objectives. I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So remember how I said you now need to string it together in one sentence and create a verb. So if I'm thinking about what's an appropriate verb, I could say, well, become aware or get to know, because that would address the awareness, right? But how compelling is that? How much of that storytelling elements there? I said just become aware or get to know. Get to know sounds a little bit more colloquial, more like the way we would actually talk, but it's still not a very exciting verb that doesn't drive me to take action. Another possible way I could do, instead of focusing on the awareness, is I could say save money, because that's going to highlight the emphasis, the inexpensive part. So save money might be a really good verb for me to consider when doing this. I could string together some other ideas. I could say save money at Patty's Pizza. But guess what I'm noticing is I'm starting to write some of this, like, oh, wait a minute, I'm talking about Patty's Pizza. I really want to talk about you and get the consumer involved in the conversation. So I could say, you can save money. I could also remember, like, oh, wait, I got family friendly up there. I could say, you and your family can save money at Patty's Pizza. I think you're starting to get the idea of how this works in creating the strategy statement. You got to put all of these ideas in here. You need to make it actionable. You need to be speaking directly to the consumer, and it needs to feel inspiring so they actually want to go out and do some of these things. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how to get started with crafting that strategy statement. I will tell you, it is not something that you do quickly, which is why we have not come up with a final answer in this video. It's something that you're going to probably spend a good chunk of time on working on. And it'll probably make a lot of sense for you to go back and forth with your teacher with a couple of drafts. This is a complicated process, but that's part of why it's in high demand, and jobs in strategy offer some of the most high-paying jobs in marketing. All right, we'll come back for our next video, and we'll talk a little bit more about how do we translate that into a big idea, and how we can expand on it with thinking about creative messaging and media buying and other aspects of strategy. Thanks for joining.